do the opening in your language.
Oh, okay.
All right, go ahead.
What time you said?
You can do it now. So just interpret it in your language. You just do it.
Buenos días o buenas tardes, depende de la hora, en sus teléfonos. Por favor, silencien sus teléfonos o apáguenlos y en ningún momento se acerquen al estrado. Si usted necesita someter su testimonio o quiere testificar, por favor, acérquese a un sargento en armas y llene la forma para testigos. Si usted quiere someter el testimonio, solo puede hacer al siguiente correo electrónico, testimony@council.nyc.gov. Una vez más, sería testimony@council.nyc.gov. Y bienvenidos a la reunión del Concilio de la Ciudad de Nueva York para el Comité de Inmigración e Infancia y Juventud.
Assalamu alaikum, jam ngeen fanaan naka suba si maa ngi leen di nuyu yéen ñëpp fi mu nekk nii dañ ñëw si council meeting bi xew si affaire immigration ak xale yi ñëw si réew mi léegi ñu ngi leen di yégal ku fekkee ne da nga amee téléphone o yu demee noonu mun ngaa couper affaire yi pour bañ a disturb ñi fi nekk nii su fekkee ne tamit da nga bugg a testify te bugg nga wax mun nga koo binda si kayit yi jox ko gaay yi ñu mun koo joxe te bu kenn ñëw jegeñ gaay yi fi mu nekk nii so ñu ngi leen di yéegal su fekkee ne ku bugg na wax tamit mun ngaa yónnee sa text lifin bi testimony@council.nyc.gov beneen bi mun nga koo def @council.newyorkcity.gov léegi ñu ngi leen di yéegal fi mu nekk nii ñu ngi leen di gërëm ku ñun ñëpp ñu fi teewee tey te ñu ngi leen di yëgal waati ku yore téléphone nag na nga coupé sa téléphone bi fi mu nekk nii te loo am nga wax ko gaay bu ñëw jegeñ si gaay ñu ngi leen di nuyu.
Bonjour, vous êtes le bienvenu aujourd'hui à réunion du Conseil de la ville de New York, la communauté de l'immigration, des enfants et de la jeunesse. À ce moment, veuillez mettre tous les téléphones portables et appareils téléphoniques sous silence afin de minimiser les perturbations tout au long de l'audience. Si vous avez témoigné, veuillez remplir une fiche de témoin auprès du gendarme. Si vous avez un témoignage que vous souhaitez soumettre au dossier, vous pouvez le faire par courrier électronique à testimony@council.nyc.gov. Encore une fois, vous pouvez le soumettre au dossier. Vous pouvez le faire par courrier électronique à testimony@council.nyc.gov. Si vous avez besoin d'un appareil de traduction, veuillez consulter un gendarme pour l'assistance. À tout moment de cette audience, il ne faut pas rapprocher donc les membres. Merci pour votre coopération.
Alors, on jarama minko kade Diallo hande ko min wonata interprète mo ngon e pular. Donc on jarama buy be weltaniki on ko addi on do hande ko addi on do ko fi wadgol miri non ka New York City Council e fi immigration fi paykoy fewndo do ni hibe landi on yon dannin téléphone ji mon din fo wadon dumaji din haram bataki kadi ko haram bataki be gafew si don fala témoignugol argol wowla hidon wawi arde bato don innetedo sergent honno ATM on ma yahon jonnon temudum témoigner ji mon din ka koko inete testimony@council.nyc.gov et si don fala kadi honno bato don inete don toujours sergent haron yejjital si don besoin ni kala ko besoin ni don tan wotan on jarama fi coopération. Merci.
Great, thank you. As you have just seen, we have simultaneous interpretation available to the public to listen to today's hearing in the following languages: French, Fulani, Spanish, and Wolof. So today we will be examining the resources available in New York City for immigrant youth who have arrived to the United States as unaccompanied children, or UACs. I'd like to begin by thanking my co-chair, Councilmember Althea Stevens, Chair of the Committee on Children and Youth, for co-chairing this hearing today. I'd also like to thank the representatives from the administration, members of the public, and my committee colleagues who have joined us here today. And I'd like to recognize Council Members De La Rosa, Council Member Osei, Council Member Menon, Council Member Hanif, Council Member Williams, and Council Member Lee. Thank you for joining us today. The Committee on Immigration and the Committee on Children and Youth are holding a timely and important hearing today to evaluate the resources our city has made available to immigrant youth who have arrived to the United States as UACs. New York City and the surrounding jurisdictions routinely receive a number of newly arrived children who are placed with family members or community members. In federal fiscal year 2014, around the time of the Committee on Immigration's last held hearing, specifically on this topic, New York City received at least 2,009 children, and Nassau and Suffolk counties respectively received 1,446 and 1,600. These were the largest numbers of any jurisdiction in the country, except Harris County, Texas, and Los Angeles County, California. By the way of comparison, between October 1st, 2023 and June 30th, 2024 alone, New York City welcomed 2,873 UACs who were released to sponsoring families. We know children and youth are settling in New York City, are an enormous gift to our city and region, and we celebrate, among other things, the public school enrollment boom that has been born from the arrival of new immigrant students. If our city provides these children and youth the conditions they need to flourish, they will be among our city's most next generation of creators, workers, and leaders. This hearing is an opportunity to do just that, assess the resources and services New York City provides to ensure that immigrant youth thrive here. In this regard, it is instructive to examine past efforts of this council and our city to welcome immigrant youth. In 2014, New York City witnessed an influx of UACs, fleeing dangerous and often deadly conditions in their homes and arriving at our city's doorstep. These children had no access to legal support and representation when appearing in New York's immigration courts. With the support of incredible community organizations, the City Council responded to these needs by launching the Unaccompanied Minors Initiative. This initiative has enabled council partners, the Immigrant Children Advocates Relief Effort, or ICARE, to provide vital legal services to these children and youth. In addition to legal services, the Council's initiative has also provided support for unaccompanied children beyond the courtroom by coordinating referrals and social services such as health and educational supports to the extent possible. We look forward to hearing testimony from the advocates about the Council's Unaccompanied Minors Initiative and the wraparound resources and services that are being provided to these children and youth. And we are immensely grateful for their colossal efforts. We want to make sure that the city does not forget the lessons of the past. Advocates have noted that gaps in services remain for immigrant youth who arrive in the U.S. as UACs. Many of these children and youth arrive having fled dangerous, violent conditions in their home countries and have undertaken harrowing journeys to seek safety in the United States. There is a growing demand for age-appropriate shelter in our city, which my co-chair, Councilmember Stevens, will discuss at greater length. In addition, immigrant youth who have arrived as UACs may be eligible for a range of immigration statuses, including special immigrant juvenile status, U or T visas, or asylum, all of which would entail a pathway to lawful permanent residency and ultimately citizenship. For this process to succeed, immigrant youth would require timely legal services to navigate the Byzantine immigration bureaucracy and its attendant deadlines and pitfalls. When simply missing a deadline can cause a child to miss out on a pathway to lawful permanent residency status and citizenship, it is clear that these children, many of whom are learning to maneuver a new country, let alone a notoriously complex legal system, must be connected with trauma-informed legal services and wraparound supports. stability and continuity of care, as well as expertise and experience in immigration law, as are essential in this context. For these reasons, we're eager to hear how the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs serves as a subject matter expert and facilitator of connections to resources on legal services, education, mental health, and so much more. We are also keen to learn of how the Office of Asylum Seeker Operations is approaching legal services for children, mindful that continuity of care, as opposed to a pro se model, is the gold standard for continuing to serve this vulnerable population. We look forward to hearing from the administration about how we can work collectively to ensure that these children and youth who need access to resources can thrive in our city. The Committee on Immigration will also hear the following legislation. Resolution 576, sponsored by Majority Leader Amanda Farias, which calls on the New York State Legislature to introduce and pass and the governor to sign legislation amending the tax law to authorize that New York City to offer a tax credit for businesses to incentivize the creation of workforce development and training programs for newly arrived immigrants. I look forward to hearing more about this bill, of which I am a proud co-sponsor. I would also like to thank the committee staff for their work on this hearing, including Nicole Gata, Legislative Counsel, Rebecca Barilla, Policy Analyst, Carolina Gill, Principal Capital Analyst, and Florentine Cabor, Unit Head. Lastly, I'd also like to thank my staff, Chief of Staff Edward Cerna, and Legislative and Budget Director Christina Botego, and everyone who is working in the background to make sure these hearings run smoothly. Let's see, we have them. I will now turn it over to my co-chair, Councilmember Stevens. And just before I do that, I have to make a special note here that I'm deeply disappointed we don't have the leadership of the agencies that are presenting here today. This seems to be a recurring theme, and I'd like to, for the record, note that it's deeply disappointing when we are discussing issues of such gravity that the leadership of the agencies don't seem to be able to make it here. I thank the staff for holding that water and being here and being present, but for the record, I must make a note of it. Chair Stevens.
Thank you, and I want to say thank you for everyone who stayed. I know there was some miscommunication about time and we are starting late, but thank you all for being here today. So good afternoon and welcome to today's hearing on resources for immigrant youth who arrived to the United States as unaccompanied children. I am Althea Stevens, Chair of Children and Youth Services. I am joined by Councilmember Alexa Vilas, Chair of Immigration Committee. Today we'll be discussing the growing crisis facing the surge of unaccompanied minor youth. Navigating a new country without proper resources or support network leaves many youth with a complex set of challenges to face. They often arrive traumatized, having fled violence, poverty, and instability, and now they find themselves struggling to meet their most basic need, including shelter. Ensuring that youth have access to safe, age-appropriate housing is the fundamental to their well-being. While DYCD extended the number of shelter beds for older youth in 2019, the reality is clear: it is not enough. In the first half of this year alone, over 1,100 youth ages 16 to 24 were turned away due to the lack of space, a fourfold increase from the same period year last year. While the Adams administration has taken steps in the right direction by providing migrant youth 18 to 23 with 60 days of shelter, there is no requirement for those age groups to be placed in youth facilities. As a result, many of those vulnerable youth are being placed in adult shelters, where their lack of access to specialized supports and resources that are desperately needed. We also cannot ignore the undeniable connection between the runaway and homeless youth system and the foster care system. Oftentimes, young people end up in DYC shelters coming from foster care, and we have seen a worrying number increase of teens entering care under destitute minors petitions. This rise is an 8% increase in fiscal year 2024, has been partly driven by the surge of unaccompanied migrant youth arriving in the city without family connections. ACS and DYCD must coordinate their efforts to ensure those youth are not just provided shelter, but connected to comprehensive services that address their unique needs, whether this is mental health support, legal support, education, or job training. I would like to thank the committee staff, Christina and Elizabeth, for their hard work in preparing for this hearing, and my entire team back at District 16. Now I would like to turn it back to Councilmember Aviles.
Thank you, Chair Stevens. We will now hear from a panel of organizations serving immigrant youth who arrive in the United States as unaccompanied children, and then we will hear from the administration. If we could have Jamie Polovich, Kimberly Shorts, Sierra Kraft, Mamadou, and Adamaba. Probably need more, I think. Great. Thank you so much for participating in this panel. I guess we can start with you, Jamie.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Polovich. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the supervisor of the Expediting New Arrivals Community Transition Team, otherwise known as Unac, at Coalition for the Homeless. I was previously with Coalition for Homeless Youth. Thank you to the chairs and the rest of the committee staff for holding this important hearing and providing the opportunity to testify about resources for immigrant youth who arrived in the United States as unaccompanied children. In addition to its advocacy and programming on behalf of homeless individuals and families, the Coalition for the Homeless is the plaintiff in the historic Callahan versus Carey case, which established the legal right to shelter in New York City. In March, the Coalition in New York City entered into a settlement agreement in the Callahan case that, among other things, extends the coalition's monitoring role to sites serving single new adult arrivals who entered the country on or after March 15, 2022, and are afraid to return to their home country. The Unac team oversees the city's compliance with this settlement. According to the Comptroller's Office, as of September 15th, the city had approximately 62,000 people seeking asylum in city-funded shelters. And as of last week, City Hall reported there are roughly 650 unaccompanied youth ages 18 to 20 in the new arrival shelters. However, the city does not track or report data on the number of unaccompanied minors that they are seeing across systems. Over the past 2 years, I have personally witnessed the city fail to not only meet the needs of unaccompanied youth new arrivals, but also fail to even acknowledge their existence in any meaningful way. A primary failure is ACS's persistent denying destitute minors the care and services they are entitled to, which has forced them to survive on the streets and to reside in single adult new arrival shelters, which are not only authorized to serve single adults and adult families, and are woefully inadequate to meet the young people's needs. This is especially given the case due to what Councilwoman Stevens already highlighted, with the DYCD runaway and homeless youth programs reaching historic capacity on a nightly basis and youth being turned away. Another alarming situation is that youth under the age of 16 are precluded from the runaway and homeless youth shelter programs due to restrictions imposed by contractual obligations by DYCD. This leaves younger unaccompanied minors particularly vulnerable to the adult new arrival shelters or left to fend for themselves. And although DYCD has for the most part continued to uphold priority placement for minors that was established by a now expired legal aid settlement. In practice, DYCD is ensuring that 16 and 17-year-olds are prioritized for beds by asking programs to discharge youth over 18 to make room for the minors, even if they have nowhere else to go. All of these unfortunate realities were created by the city, and the city has the power to address them if they wanted to. The experience of new arrival youth highlight the need for written policies that need to be accessible to advocates and the public to ensure the protection and safety of unaccompanied youth arriving alone here in New York City. In addition to policy recommendations, the Coalition and Legal Aid Society outline in our testimonies that our recommendations are not exhaustive of all that should be done to adequately support this population, and that the city needs to establish a working group to do a deeper dive into what is needed and address those needs accordingly. I'm going to outline 4 recommendations. The first is that New York City must allocate appropriate resources to support and protect immigrant youth. This includes the city allocating more funding to DYCD to increase the number of beds available in their runaway and homeless youth programs so that all 16 and 17-year-olds seeking placement can be placed, even if it is just while they're waiting a transition into ACS's care. And then in addition, DYCD needs to ensure that all new programming that is brought online to serve runaway and homeless youth does not have a minimum age requirement of 16 years old. And we ask the City Council to introduce local legislation to mandate that any new DYCD runaway and homeless youth contracts eliminate lower age restrictions in line with state law. Number 2 is regarding training. It is imperative that the city implement programming for staff of all city agencies that might interact with immigrant youth geared towards supporting this population. Such programming must include implicit bias training, particularly with regard to the adultification of Black children, as well as ensuring specifically that ACS take a consistent approach to requests for documentation when they are young people are referred as destitute children. The third recommendation is that we need to ensure that shelters are appropriately identifying young people. We ask that City Council take the shelter case management system to task by ensuring they include a number of steps to ensure that unaccompanied minors are identified when they present at the new arrival center or reticketing or staying in new arrival shelters. It is crucial that case managers understand that trust must be fostered with young people to ensure accurate reporting of their ages. And then the last recommendation is regarding language access. The city must ensure that there is meaningful language access provided to new arrival youth. Youth are quite often forced to attempt communication in a dialect that is not their own, creating confusion and misunderstanding regarding their needs and wishes, including any desire to go into ACS care. This is particularly the case for youth from West Africa, when, for example, youth who speak Guinean Pular are provided only a Senegalese Pular interpreter. In addition to all of those recommendations, the city overall must begin to track and report the number of youth identified as being destitute minors in order to better assess the demand for services to this population. ACS must specifically begin tracking and reporting the number of destitute child referrals, including data regarding the referral source, the number of referred children who are unaccompanied migrant children, the countries of origin or referred children and youth, the languages spoken by each referred children and youth, the ages of referred children and youth, and the number of destitute children accepted into care by ACS. In conclusion, I want to thank the council again and for holding this important hearing and your longstanding commitment to this work. The Legal Aid Society and the Coalition for the Homeless will be submitting joint written testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions relating to my testimony or my previous role.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Schertz, and I am a staff attorney in the Special Litigation and Law Reform Unit at the Juvenile Rights Practice of the Legal Aid Society. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. Imagine you are a teenage boy. You should be in school, and you should be plotting the next time you get to hang out and laugh with your friends. Instead, your community is in shambles. You've arrived home to find that your house with your family in it has been bombed. A trusted adult hands you some documents with a birth date that's not yours, making you over 18, and tells you to get out of here and save yourself. So you embark on a harrowing journey spanning months and more countries than you can count on one hand. You've seen and experienced things that you shouldn't have seen at your age. Then you finally make it. You're in the United States where you think you're finally safe and free, able to start a new life and get the education you always wanted. Instead, you're forced to remain in a cage bouncing between different immigration detention centers for several more months before being sent to New York City. You think this is finally it. You will finally be safe. But you find that some people don't believe that you're the age that you say you are because those papers you had no choice but to use in order to survive. Those that do believe you say they've done all that they can. Your only refuge is a cot surrounded by adult men you don't know. You continue to be treated like an adult when really you're just a kid in need of a loving and supportive home. This story and those similar to it reflect the experiences of so many immigrant youth who land in our city. Although the Legal Aid Society lauds efforts to reduce the number of poor Black and Latin youth in foster care, such efforts should not be at the expense of those youth who have nowhere else to turn. Over the last several months, the Legal Aid Society has received an uptick in referrals for unaccompanied minors being refused care from the Administration for Children's Services. Many of these youth are newly arrived children from West Africa, some of whom use documents falsified to make them over the age of 18 so that they could escape the dangerous conditions of their home countries and travel to the United States on their own. In such cases, ACS has initially failed to credit the youth's own statements regarding their age, including reasonable explanations provided regarding the use of falsified documents. And ACS has improperly contacted the United States Department of State for verification, despite the fact that the State Department relies on documents used to enter the country and therefore cannot actually verify an individual's age. Although the Legal Aid Society has generally been successful in advocating with them, with ACS to properly determine that these youth are destitute children, the city's failure to put a system in place to address the needs of children like them created unnecessary obstacles and undue delay to the detriment of these children. As we will lay out in our written testimony, New York has implemented a statutory scheme authorizing the care of destitute children. Today, I will present but a number of policy recommendations and resource recommendations. And as Ms. Polovich stated, these do not encompass all that can be done to serve this population. As it stands, ACS refuses to investigate referrals of destitute children unless a report is made to the state central registry. This is despite the fact that neither statute nor regulation mandates a call to the SCR before the commissioner can take action to meet his obligation to destitute children. It is also worth highlighting that multiple reports have to be made to the SCR before a case is finally accepted for investigation. Such a practice creates an unnecessary burden on those assisting immigrant youth, including other city agency staff, and contributes to significant delays in getting these children into ACS's care and custody. Accordingly, to streamline referrals of minor immigrant youth to ACS, ACS must create a designated team for destitute child referrals and make the contact information for that team available to shelter staff, staff of other city agencies, community organizations, and advocates. It is crucial that City Council also hold ACS accountable for taking a child-centered approach whenever there exist conflicting documents regarding a youth's age. Importantly, the reality is that many immigrant children present travel documents with false birthdays when they flee dangerous conditions in their home countries and travel unaccompanied by an adult. Therefore, ACS must give these documents the appropriate weight, but they should heavily credit the youth's own statements, particularly when such an explanation is offered. Additionally, because ACS is obligated to act in the best interests of the child, not only should ACS refrain from requiring the youth to submit to invasive bone density testing, as we've seen requested in cases in the past, but ACS must absolutely cease its practice of contacting the U.S. Department of State in an effort to verify children's birth dates. As I stated before, the State Department often relies on false documentation that was procured as a means of survival so that the youth could escape the dangerous conditions of their home country. And so the communication with the State Department ultimately fails to provide any meaningful verification of the young person's true age. But of graver concern is the risk of danger that such a practice poses to the young person's family remaining back home and on the young person, him or herself, should he or she be forced to return. Further, ACS must provide appropriate language assistance services to those youth with limited English proficiency, and those services must be in the youth's native dialect. With regard to services, I reiterate Ms. Polovich's recommendation that the city and ACS specifically begin tracking and reporting the number of youth identified as minors without adult caretakers. And in addition to those recommendations, while the mayor's office has allocated funding to legal clinics assisting asylum seekers in preparing their asylum applications in order to meet filing deadlines imposed by the U.S. government, many of them remain unrepresented and are forced to navigate an incredibly complex system of laws and regulations, and leaving them unable to meaningfully defend themselves against possible orders or threats of deportation. Therefore, particularly given the special vulnerability immigrant youth face in removal, also known as deportation proceedings, and the potential for rapidly approaching deadlines for immigration applications, such as asylum, which could be 1 year, and special immigrant juvenile status, which is up to the age of 21. It is imperative that the city allocate additional funding to immigration legal service providers so that they can provide meaningful and ongoing representation to this vulnerable population, including designated funding for youth in the foster care system. While older youth are being left to the wayside, poor immigrant families are also being needlessly ensnared by the family policing system. So the Legal Aid Society urges the New York City Council to call a separate hearing to also delve more deeply into the plight of recently arrived immigrant families. I'm
sorry, if you can summarize a little bit, because we have a panel still to go, please.
Yes,
Thank you.
I was just about to wrap up.
Thank you.
Our recommendations therein are in our written testimony, but we just wanted to direct your attention to that portion of our testimony as well, where we will be sharing some of our significant concerns regarding this population. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Chairperson Aviles and Chairperson Stevens and members of the Committees on Immigration and Children and Youth for the opportunity to speak today and for holding this important hearing. My name is Sierra Kraft, and I'm the Executive Director of iCare. We're a coalition of legal service organizations providing free legal representation to unaccompanied children facing deportation in New York City. Unaccompanied children are some of the most vulnerable members of our community. Many have fled unimaginable violence, trafficking, and instability, traveling without their parents to seek safety and protection here in New York. But the moment they arrive, they are placed in deportation proceedings, expected to defend themselves in a complex and intimidating immigration system without the right to an attorney. Even adults struggle to navigate this overwhelming system. How can we expect children to manage it on their own? I recently sat in immigration court and saw two young brothers from El Salvador, ages 2 and 6, sitting at a table before a judge expected to represent themselves. The judge gave them a continuance and urged the family to find an attorney, warning that without one, the boys would likely be ordered removed. After the hearing, I spoke with their family, and they told me they had been searching for an attorney for over a year. I could sense their fear, and it was truly a heartbreaking moment. No child should have to face this immigration court alone. And access to an attorney isn't just helpful, it can mean the difference between life and death. Without representation, these children stand only a 15% chance of winning their cases, and this can result in getting deported back to dangerous conditions where their safety and their lives are at risk. But with a trained lawyer by their side, those odds improve dramatically. Children supported by iCare attorneys have over a 90% success rate, giving them a real chance to stay and build bright futures here in New York. While the administration's response to the broader influx of asylum seekers has been setting up pro se legal clinics, these models are not appropriate for children. Children cannot be expected to represent themselves. They need full representation from experienced attorneys who can guide them through the complicated laws and procedures, and without it, their cases are almost impossible to win. New York continues to rank fourth in the country for the number of unaccompanied children, with more than 8,000 released to sponsors every year. But the resources needed to serve them have not kept pace. Collaboratives like iCare, which focus specifically on serving unaccompanied minors, have not seen an increase in funding in 5 years, even as the number of children needing legal services has grown exponentially. This year, iCare's coalition of seven legal service providers requested funding to increase the number of legal screenings, direct representation, and Know Your Rights trainings. Yet despite the growing wait lists and overwhelming demand, we were approved for far less than what's needed to fully meet the need. And without additional support, more children will be up against the system alone and likely fall through the cracks. The challenges we face aren't just about funding. The attorneys working on the front lines of this issue are also stretched thin. Providers are managing overwhelming caseloads while grappling with vicarious trauma, burnout, and low wages. High turnover and staffing shortages make it difficult to maintain the expertise needed to support these children effectively. What we need is long-term solutions to build capacity, such as investing in multi-year funding, expanding strategic programs to retain experienced attorneys through competitive pay, and scaling resources for collaboratives. And without these investments, too many children will age out of eligibility for protections like special immigrant juvenile status, or simply remain undocumented and being forced to live in the shadows. Collaboratives like iCare are lifelines for these children, and since our founding, we've supported over 14,000 young people, offering not just critical legal representation, but also case management that helps them build stable lives in a city they now call home. But to continue this work and keep up with the growing demand, we need the city and this administration to prioritize additional funding specifically for unaccompanied minors, not only for legal services, but for case management. These wraparound services ensure they have the support they need to thrive beyond winning their legal cases. We urge City Council to invest in legal services to prevent unnecessary deportation and ensure that every child has access to a skilled attorney. And with your support, we can make sure that no child has to face this process alone. Thank you for your tireless efforts and advocacy to champion the rights of immigrant children. We look forward to our continued partnership and ensuring we live our values as a sanctuary city. Thank you again for putting together this hearing and for your ongoing commitment to supporting these vulnerable members of our community.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having this hearing. My name is Adam Abba, founder and executive director of Africana. The arrival of minors to New York City is not a new thing, but what is alarming is how the current administration has chosen to ignore the growing need for proper support over the past 2 years. Personally, I have welcomed thousands of these minors, and I'm deeply grateful to people like Jamie, who have consistently supported us. Many of these minors that I've encountered come from the African continent and some from South and Central America, Turkish and Afghanis, while others are Chinese nationals who cross the border undetected. These are vulnerable children, and we've been raising concerns about their cases since they arrived. Yet grassroots organizations like Africana have been overwhelmed by the lack of governmental action to address these needs. We need urgent action now. I fear the day when I receive a call informing me that one of these children have taken their own life due to the lack of mental health support. These children are at risk of being trafficked, assaulted, or even disappearing without a trace. The trauma they endured is unimaginable, and yet we are failing them. We are missing critical language access and cultural competency to guide them through the adjustment to life here. These children are our future leaders, but we have left them in crisis. I have personally stepped in countless times to translate for these children. One question that always breaks my heart is when they ask them what they want to be, they respond, "I've never been asked. Whatever you think is best for me, I'll do." These are children who have witnessed genocide, rape, persecution, and government corruption. Yet they are living in some of the most vulnerable corners of our city, invisible to most. I have found minors in mosques blending with worshipers just so no one will notice their age. I beg you, do not let these children slip through the cracks any longer. I cannot describe the pain of holding a young girl who trembles with fear after being raped by soldiers in her home country, with nowhere safe to go. Fortunately, that young girl has been reunited with her family, but not all children are lucky. Many would prefer to be in the care of ACS, sheltered in building, rather than left to survive in a code. It has been 2 years. We cannot wait any longer. I also want to thank the DYCD staff who have gone above and beyond at sites, cooking culturally sensitive food, learning the children's languages, and connecting to community support like Africana. For the last 2 years, we've been asking City Hall to create a 24-hour DYCD drop-in center for unaccompanied minors, and we warned them of the increasing numbers of arriving in NYC. Africana has created safe space for these children without any funding, and we've lost count of how many unaccompanied minors have shown up at our doors seeking help. Our office remains open 7 days a week with volunteer staff trained to support unaccompanied minors, but we cannot do this alone. I must reiterate our request for a 24-hour drop-in site that welcomes unaccompanied minors with staff who are native speakers of their languages and culturally competent. Lastly, I want to address the involvement of the Mayor's Office International Affairs in contacting embassies to obtain documents for unaccompanied youth. This is concerning for the children here and for the families they left behind. We do not know the horrors these children fled from, and alerting embassies risks exposing them to harm. In one case, Client B, and a minor who's 15, Africana intervened when the family of the minor extorted him for money in exchange for his original document. We were able to secure documents he needed without revealing his whereabouts, and he is now safe. We risk international complications if embassies seek to return their nationals, as we saw in the Cuban national in 2000, Elian Gonzalez, who was eventually extradited back to Cuba. The city government needs to work with organizations in the US and abroad to address these issues. There are also thousands of minors in Herc who are in fact children. Their smugglers alter their passports to help them escape their countries. Some of these children are young as 13 years old, and despite undergoing bone density tests, are presenting other documents to prove their age. City agencies do not believe them. We have left them to survive on their own. We need more beds at 18 to 24 years old in DYCD, as DYCD has been the best at addressing these needs, providing culturally sensitive food and then enrolling them in school and sending them to us for additional emotional support. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mamadou Diallo, and I will be reading Mamadou's written statement. And first of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to testify in front of you. And also, I'm the Director of Operations at Africana. Adam Abba is our founder here. My name is Mamadou. I'm 17 years old. When I arrived in New York City in 2024, I was sent from Roosevelt to Randall's Island. I was scared. This huge cold place offered no help, just isolation. But then I heard voices speaking Pula, my native language, and I clung to them for support. They told me what everyone already knew. There is no real help at Randall's Island. I didn't enroll in school because I didn't even know how. When my 30 days in the shelter ended, I tried to go to St. Bridget, only to be turned away because I was missing a shot. They told me to go back to the Roosevelt Hotel. When I got to the Roosevelt Hotel, a nurse looked at my passport and made a call. Suddenly, people were gathering, whispering around me, and I had no idea what was happening. They sent me upstairs, and after a while, the police arrived. I didn't speak English, and I was terrified. I thought I had done something wrong. They took me to the hospital for tests and brought me back to Roosevelt, where a staff suggested I call a woman named Adama, someone who helps in cases like mine. I had never met Adama, but I had heard how she had helped so many others. I was sitting there scared and confused as people talked about me. Then Adama called me and told me they had called the police on me because I was accused of being an impersonator. She then connected me with a woman named Jamie. After hours of waiting, they put me in a cab and sent me to the Bronx. I had no idea where I was going or why. Later, a woman in a hijab woke me, speaking in my native language. She introduced herself as Adama, the woman I had spoken to on the phone. She told me ACS didn't believe I was 17 and couldn't help me, but she and Jamie were fighting for my case. She asked if she could go through my bag, and I agreed. She took pictures of my documents, always in conversation with Jamie. I remember when ACS arrived. They questioned me and took me to the hospital for yet another exam. I told ACS I was 17 years old and that I needed help. I showed them a copy of my passport, my birth certificate, and my WHO vaccination card, World Health Organization vaccination card, that all showed I was 17, but they did not believe me. They said they spoke to ICE, immigration, and they said I was lying. I felt confused, scared, and hopeless. Eventually, I was sent to a new shelter where Jamie had managed to secure me a bed. After 5 months, ACS finally believed me that I was 17 and I agreed to take After 5 months, ACS finally believed me that I was 17 and agreed to take me into care. In those 5 months, they did nothing to help me and accused me of being a liar. Now, even though they agreed to take me into foster care, I'm still at the shelter. I stayed in touch with Adama, and she invited me to Africana's Harlem office, a place she promised was safe where I would find others like me. And she was right. I found many people my age trapped in the same circumstances. I didn't know how to enroll in school, but Adama connected me with someone who helped me through the process. I had nowhere else to go, so I started going to Africana every day. Adama introduced me to Kaba, a Mauritanian asylum seeker who looks out for me, buys me food, and makes sure I'm okay. Now, I'll help at Africana by running the food pantry, where we feed many people, and I receive a stipend for my work. I needed a lawyer, and Jamie got me one from Legal Aid. I rely on Jamie, Adama, and everyone at Africana for everything. I came to America alone with no family, but at Africana, I found a new family. If I need clothes, shoes, or permission slips signed for my school, I go to Africana. All of us do. We are part of the soccer program and other activities, and they ensure we have legal representation. When I meet others like me, I always tell them to go to Africana. I either take them myself or give them the address. In my shelter, no one speaks our language. When there is an emergency, we call Africana to translate. Even at the hospital, we rely on Africana's staff to help us understand. I'm so grateful to Africana, to Jamie, and to my lawyer, Daniela, for everything they have done. But we need more help. When I arrived in New York City in early 2024, I was sent to Randall's Island, which is an adult shelter, and I'm a child. I was scared in a place with no help, just isolation. We didn't come to America because we wanted to. We came because we had no choice. Africana is helping us survive, but we need better treatment. Please help us. There are so many young kids like me, some in shelters, others are on the streets. Every 60 days, we have to renew our shelter stay, which makes it hard to focus on school. Attendance is everything, and when you are trying to learn English or attend after-school programs, missing days is devastating. I'm lucky, but not everyone is. Not everyone has someone to help them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please express our sincerest thanks for sharing your story and experience here. And it's unfortunate that you have experienced so many policy failures. And I'm deeply grateful that you found Africana and many of the folks at the dais to provide you support. We can and must do better.
Well,
Just one quick question for Mamadou. In all of the facilities, you mentioned no one speaks his language at this current facility. Has that been the circumstance since he's been in the different places?
I'm sorry, my name is Mamadou as well, so we talk about Mamadou. Mamadou here? Oh, okay, Mamadou. There you go. Okay, thank you. Yes, in all those facilities, nobody spoke my language. The staff members, none of them spoke my language.
Can I ask one of maybe two of the other panelists, have you seen cases similar to this? Can you give us a little bit of experience around this?
I mean, particularly in my previous role, I've seen a lot of cases like this, and they usually play out very similar to what was just explained was his situation, which I was also involved in, where a young person finds an advocate or another trusted adult in the community. They're not being identified through any systems or government agencies that are actually tasked with doing this work. And then they would reach out to me when I was previously at the Coalition for Homeless Youth, and then we would advocate with both ACS to have them taken into care as destitute minors, and also with the DYC Runaway and Homeless Youth providers to provide immediate support, whether it was at a drop-in center or a shelter. And I think that one of the most concerning things that we've seen a pattern of, which has been talked about here, is just ACS's approach of not believing young people, and seems like overwhelmingly they are trying to do everything to prove the young people ineligible for services, as opposed to welcoming them with trust, right, that their stories are real and their experiences are valid, and then trying to work to advocate to make them eligible for services. And we've seen that consistently, and especially with telling the young people that their documentation isn't valid, that they are lying. Those are constant things that come up that young people are being told by child protective service workers. And there's also no consistency in what documentation they're referring to. We've seen young people whose passports indicate that they are minors, and there's clerical errors at the border where they're things like notice to appear tickets have the same month, day, but a different year, making them 18 or older when all their other documents make them minors. ACS refuses to accept them as minors. Then we've seen young people whose passports were falsified so that they could flee, but all their other documents, birth certificates from their home country, indicate that they are in fact minors, and then ACS does not take them. And so there's also just no consistency in what documentation they're saying young people need. And like my partner at the Legal Aid Society testified to, it's not in statute or regulation anywhere. One, that they need any documentation, and two, if they did, what that documentation has to be.
And if I may add a couple of things. So there also appear to be inconsistencies across city agencies. We have had a couple of youth where a high school principal, these children were enrolled in school, they were connected with community-based organizations, and the principal believed that they were the ages that they said they would, and even informed me that if she thought that they were older, that she would have discussed with them the possibility of pursuing a GED program. But because she believed that they were the age they said they were, she enrolled them in their appropriate grade level. And she found it quite appalling, the hoops that had to be jumped through to get ACS to take these kids into care. And I believe that there have been staff at the Hercs as well, who have identified that these are kids, not adults, and they're the ones connecting the youth to community-based organizations, and that's where we're getting our referrals from as well, as from community-based organizations that these youth are connected to. And I also want to highlight that ACS, like I said in my testimony, is insisting that reports be made to the state central registry. That's not a legal necessity. I have a youth who still hasn't been identified by ACS. No investigation has been commenced. He's got a long, complicated name, so it's possible that whoever's, the community-based organizations or the advocates who are calling in the reports for him are not spelling his name correctly, or they may not be using the right terminology. They may not be saying this is a destitute child. They're not lawyers. They don't know what terminology needs to be used to flag this case for the SCR to process it as a destitute child case. And it's significant delays because we can't even get an investigation started. So it's incredibly frustrating and heartbreaking for these kids who have to jump through so many hoops to get taken into ACS care.
Thank you. And I'll definitely make it succinct because I know we are running behind schedule and we have some members who want to ask questions. But first question, I just wanted to ask Mahuba, have you received additional funding from the city of support? Because I know since the beginning of the influx, you have been on the front lines, and I know there's been lots of talk about making sure you're getting support, and I'm just trying to see, has there been any update around you getting additional support for the additional work that you have taken on?
I think we're still in the stages of additional conversation, but we just currently received a contract to be at St. Bridges. But the challenge is really big. It's not just St. Bridges. We need to be at our central office. Our central office is the hub. It's where unaccompanied minors are literally being dropped off all hours of the night. But I also want to add about the language part. The city really heavily relies on the language line, and for these children who are dropped off at all random hours, overnight you don't have those languages. And staff have sympathy to say, listen, there's no translator, and I cannot take this child in unless someone interprets. And we interpret for them so that they can enroll these children. Language access is a big issue, and we do need funding to support our volunteers who are translating.
So you have volunteers who've been like, when the language line is not open, where they're picking up for that. And do you know how many hours roughly that might be? Like in
sometimes a 24-hour job.
Okay.
With Mamadou's case, he had to be sent to the hospital to take a bone density test. We had to choose a volunteer to go with him to go there. And they were there for approximately, I think, 4 hours.
Jamie, I just had a really quick question, and I guess please be succinct, just even around like the 2019 agreement where you were on the front lines for that, and that was something that I know that you fought really hard for and was an advocate. But could you talk about the significance of that win and how, if we would have actually actualized that, it could have helped us in the situation that we're in now?
So there were a few good things that happened in 2019. You're talking about the legal aid settlement? Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I think with CW versus New York City and the settlement that established, for all intensive purposes, the right to shelter for minors, 16 and 17-year-olds in the DYCD system, the terms of the settlement only lasted for 3 years, and so it expired, it'll be a year this December. And I think that it would help if it was still in place, but I do want to commend DYCD for voluntarily, still doing the process. I think that the issue with the way that it works in the DYCD system is unlike the Callahan law that requires that the DHS system expand to meet the need. The settlement and now even the voluntary process just says that they need to prioritize the placement of youth, which then leads, like I said in my testimony, to older youth having to be kicked out to make room. So instead of bringing on new beds, which I know you know well, always advocating for more beds, they are asking older youth to leave so that the younger youth can come in.
And that's been one of my bigger issues, where I've consistently said that we need more beds, and then it's a cycle of, well, we don't need more beds, but if you're kicking people out, then that's the only way we can make room when we know that there's not enough beds, because 60 beds just especially during this time, we know that's not enough. But I'll yield so we can get to more council members.
Councilmember Hanif.
Thank you, Chairs Aviles and Stevens, and Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Councilmember Shahana Hanif, and I have a few questions. First, I'll start with Mamadou. How can the city improve to make the journey in New York City safer and easier for unaccompanied youth? And from your perspective, have you seen any progress?
Well, Behali inde maɓɓe ko Shahana Hanif ɓe nete haray ɓe faala andude haray e an ko tawi itti hewtuɗa ɗo kon ko feƴƴinɗa kon kono haray nde saare ɗo wooreɓe saare nden New York City ɗo wawata waɗugol fi yo piiji ɗin yaaru no duwira noon hara hiɗon hiɓe wallitade on ɓe waɗande on ko ɓe dowan waɗande kon onon pay koye naatukoye ɗo kon e ɓaawo mawɓe maɓɓe ɓen donc haray ko honɗum an haray marɗa ko wiya e ɗum ɗon ko ɓe wawata waɗude ɓe wallito.
On jarama on fof on salminama haray on weltanama ko joɗɗon kon fi wallitagol arɓe ɗo ɓen la huuri kadi on fof mon landi siɗon e jaam joni haray min komi tori ko yon wallito min fota arɓe ɗo ɓen hay koye fof e mum haray lan tori ballal ko yon ɓeydu men wallitade ko ɗum ɗon mari komi wiya on.
So first of all, I would like to greet everyone here, and I would like to let you know that I'm grateful for this opportunity. So what I have to say is that to do your best and to help us out, irrespective of whether we are unaccompanied minors or not, help all the asylum seekers, but help them as well. That's what they need. They need a lot of help because their situation is not good. So they do need a lot of help. So that's what they would like to let you know.
Thank you. And two questions for our advocates. How long does it typically take to verify someone is in fact a minor? And then are all unaccompanied migrant youth accounted for?
For the second question, I can certainly say not all unaccompanied minor youth are accounted for. And we're particularly concerned because of just how long it took for us as advocates to finally get ACS to believe these youth. And we know that there are so many more who have not been brought to our attention, and we're concerned that once they hear the answer no, they're not, maybe they don't have stronger advocates to help them navigate the process. Maybe they don't know to reach out to us. But in terms of how long it's taken, the youth that we've assisted so far, I think it took about a month once we started escalating their cases to ACS's attention. But that doesn't account for previous advocacy efforts and contacts with ACS on behalf of those youth. So it does go beyond that month, but once they're brought to our attention, it was about a month.
So basically, unaccompanied youth need an advocate to help them get through the process.
Unfortunately, and it should not be that way.
And then just final question, are the youth also receiving any notices for eviction in the shelters that they live in, the 60-day rule?
Yeah, so I think one thing for the young people that are in fact minors that have documentation that make them older, the majority of those situations that we're seeing, the young people's documentation that's not correct has them between 18 and 23 years old, and so then they do get 60 days in the HERC. I can't say for sure if there are minors that have documentation that make them older than 23, which would mean that they would be getting 30-day notices. But they do get the 60-day notices, and then those that are in school, right, or other factors get automatic extensions, and then those that do not get automatic extensions, they need to still apply for extenuating circumstances. to get replaced, which we're seeing overwhelmingly, regardless of age, people are being denied the EC extensions, and that doesn't, right, young people fall under that category as well of being denied, which means then they're sent to the streets.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. We'd like to recognize Councilmember Joseph has joined us. Thank you, Councilmember. I think with that, we'll move to the administration. I want to thank you all for the work you're doing and your testimony and all of the recommendations you put forward to this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, chairs. We will now hear testimony from the administration. We will hear from Susan Haskell, Amy Wilkerson, Masha Gindler, Tom Tortorici, Stephanie Gandel, Luisa Linares, and Penina Oren. Before we begin, I will administer the affirmation. If panelists delivering testimony, as well as members of the administration who will answer questions from council members, could all please raise their right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before these committees, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Stevens, Chair Aviles, and members of the Committees on Children and Youth and Immigration. Thank you for holding this hearing. My name is Tom Tortorici, and I'm the Executive Director of Legal and Support Initiatives at the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, led by Commissioner Manuel Castro. I'm pleased to be joined by my colleagues from the Department of Youth and Community Development, Administration for Children's Services, and Office of Asylum Seeker Operations. I'll read only an excerpt of this testimony so that we can move forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Regarding services for unaccompanied immigrant youth, MOIA oversees a small portion of the city-funded programs that provide free, confidential immigration legal services, case management, and information to New York City's immigrant youth. These programs include the MOIA Immigration Legal Support Centers, also known as Action NYC, the Haitian Response Initiative, the Rapid Response Legal Collaborative, DREAM Act Application Assistance, and the Asylum Seeker Legal Assistance Network. In fiscal 24, these MOIA programs provided services such as legal assistance and case management to more than 23,563 immigrant New Yorkers, an estimated 3,000 of which were immigrant youth, regardless of their family status. This is a 34% increase over the total number of individuals served by MOIA programs in fiscal 23, due largely to the city's $5 million investment in the Asylum Seeker Legal Assistance Program, which itself provided immigration legal help to more than 1,000 newly arrived immigrant youth under 18 in fiscal 24. We also oversee the MOIA Immigration Legal Support Hotline, which immigrant New Yorkers, including unaccompanied youth, can call Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Hotline callers are referred to the service providers best suited to meet their unique needs. Unaccompanied immigrant youth calling the hotline are referred to the iCare network through a secure web form. Over the last 2 months, hotline operators referred 78 immigrant youth to iCare using the referral form, and provided informational flyers to an additional 92 callers who didn't meet our referral requirements. In addition to direct legal and support services, MOIA provides immigrant New Yorkers with reliable, up-to-date information by way of our immigrant rights workshops. More than 8,900 immigrant New Yorkers of all ages attended those in fiscal 24. Finally, this year, MOIA redeployed capacity for the Action NYC in Schools program run by Catholic Charities Community Services to prioritize immigration legal screenings and assistance for unaccompanied immigrant youth aged 18 to 20 at runaway and homeless youth sites to ensure they would not age out of eligibility for a form of immigration relief known as special immigrant juvenile status. In the 3-month period from June to August 2024, the Action NYC in Schools team worked with RHY case managers to complete more than 170 immigration legal screenings for RHY clients aged 18 to 20. They accepted or referred 84 cases for legal representation and filed 6 emergency age-out petitions in family court. All of these screened were provided with an eligibility determination and brief advice and counsel regarding what would be needed to proceed, such as how to identify a trustworthy guardian. The legal team also provided RHY case managers with immigration legal orientations and best practices for pre-screening. These numbers are preliminary as we await final fiscal 25 Q1 data from that program. In addition to programs, Moya serves as a cross-agency advisor. We provide both sister agencies and community partners with federal policy updates, and we advocate on behalf of federal policies that are in favor of unaccompanied immigrant youth. We also serve as an advisor in several interagency initiatives and working groups addressing services for immigrant youth and relevant topics such as domestic and gender-based violence, human trafficking, and exploitation. NGBV is a primary lead in many of these working groups, as that's their primary area of responsibility. In conclusion, thousands of hardworking city leaders and staff, nonprofit professionals, advocates, and volunteers across a vast interdisciplinary network of agencies and community-based organizations have made extraordinary efforts to support the safety, well-being, and thriving of unaccompanied immigrant youth arriving to and residing in our city. This work is personal for many contributing to these human service efforts, especially if they had to overcome challenges in their own youth or arrive to New York City as immigrant youth themselves. Each young person that has been supported by these efforts, whose challenges may have been eased and whose quality of life may have been supported, motivates us to continue and develop this work further. Today's investments in support for unaccompanied immigrant youth will lead to a stronger New York, made possible by the contributions that these youth have and will continue to make here in our city and country. We have great respect for their bravery in the face of adversity and gratitude for their positive contributions. While much has been done already, many challenges remain, and there is still more work to be done. Thank you for your attention to this important topic. We look forward to your questions.
Great. We'd like to recognize Councilmember Krishnan joined us. Please.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Gandel. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for External Affairs at the Administration for Children's Services. In this role, I oversee a number of offices, including Intergovernmental Affairs and also the Office of Immigrant Services and Language Affairs, or ISLA as we refer to it. In addition to my colleagues from other agencies, I'm joined today by Panina Oren, who's the Manhattan Borough Chief of the Division of Family Court Legal Services, which manages all of our destitute minor filings in family court, as well as my colleague, the Deputy Commissioner for Prevention Services, Luisa Linares, who did not fit at the table but is behind me. I'm going to summarize my testimony, but you have the full testimony. Many children and youth who immigrate to the United States come here with their families. The overwhelming majority of children and youth who come to the United States without their parents are identified at the southern border by U.S. Customs and Border Control and detained as unaccompanied alien children, or as we've been referring to them, unaccompanied minors. The Federal U.S. Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR, is typically responsible for the care and custody of unaccompanied minors and has contracts for their own foster homes and group care facilities. Notably, this system is entirely separate from ACS, and ACS has no legal role or authority with regard to the care or custody of these children with ORR. ACS is family supports. We provide, manage, and fund a number of family supports, including prevention services, homemaking services, and child care services. Prevention services are free, typically voluntary, and available throughout the 5 boroughs, regardless of immigration status. Since 2022, some of our contracted prevention providers have been offering their services on site at both the DHS shelters and at the HERCs to support newly arrived families. We also have ACS staff on site at the Roosevelt Hotel, connecting families to community-based resources, including prevention services when appropriate. As you know, ACS developed and managed Promise NYC, a child care assistance program specifically for low-income families with children, including undocumented children whose immigration status makes them ineligible for other federally funded child care assistance. The ISLA office within ACS provides support and guidance on immigration and language access issues for ACS staff and contracted providers. Since the start of the increase in newly arrived New Yorkers, we have seen an increased demand for ISLA's assistance and support. In 2024 to date, ISLA has conducted 78 trainings for ACS and provider agency staff. These training sessions focus on understanding the trauma faced by newly arrived immigrant families, how to help connect them to immigration services, and how to access language access services. We've also expanded our language access services, both in spending and in scope, including, most recently, to our detention centers. Over the past 2 years, we have seen an increase in the number of youth coming into foster care as destitute minors. New York State Family Court Act Section 1092 defines destitute minors, and that definition's in the testimony, but I won't read it to you. There are currently about 6,500 children and youth in foster care. As of August 31st, 2024, there were 239 children and youth in foster care on destitute minor petitions. For the full year of 2023, 89 children and youth came into foster care, up from 58 in 2022. All youth in foster care receive the full panoply of foster care services, regardless of their immigration status. This includes a foster care placement with a family when possible, medical care, mental health services, educational assistance, Fair Futures coaches, etc. In addition, long before the recent increase in asylum seekers, ACS has worked closely with foster care agencies to address the immigration needs of children and youth in foster care. Each foster care agency has at least one immigration liaison who works with the ISLA team to ensure that any child or youth in ACS care who is not a United States citizen is referred for immigration legal services. The ISLA team is currently tracking about 450 children as immigrant youth in care. These children have come to the United States from 57 countries, with the largest number being from Central America and the West Indies, South America, and Africa. Many of these children and youth in care will be eligible for special immigrant juvenile status, SIJs, and some are eligible for immigration relief through other means, such as asylum, T visas, U visas, which are available for victims of trafficking or certain crimes here in the United States. As you might know, it takes many years to get a green card through SIJs. Currently, the federal government is processing green cards for those whose approved SIJs application was filed before January 2021. However, during the waiting time, the youth may be eligible to apply for a work permit and have their deportation proceedings dismissed due to the Biden administration's deferred action policy. ACS is committed to helping New York City's families thrive, and we are eager to do all that we can to help families and youth who have come to New York City for a better life. Happy to take your questions.
Good afternoon, Chair Stevens, Chair Aviles, and members of the Children and Youth Immigration Committees. I'm Susan Haskell, Deputy Commissioner for Youth Services at DYCD, and I'm joined today by Dr. Amy Wilkerson, Assistant Commissioner for Runaway and Homeless Youth Services. On behalf of Commissioner Howard, thank you for this opportunity to update the Council about how we address the needs of new arrivals within DYCD's Runaway and Homeless Youth Services. We're grateful to have worked with the Council over the years, as well as providers and advocates, to build a comprehensive continuum and ecosystem of RHY services. DYCD Runaway and Homeless Youth programs are designed to serve youth holistically, enabling them to obtain the services needed to help them thrive. We're committed to helping young New Yorkers build new skills and flourish. DYCD funds a portfolio of RHY services that are delivered by community-based providers through contracts. The 3 types of services include residential programs, drop-in centers, and street outreach. Combined, they reach more than 40,000 young people annually. Services are available to young people regardless of their immigration status. Our residential programs include crisis services and transitional independent living support programs. The New York State Office of Children and Family Services regulates all residential services provided by youth bureaus across New York State. I'm proud over the past several years that DYCD tripled the number of beds in residential programs for young people ages 16 to 20 for a total of 753 beds. We implemented 2 key program policy changes to reflect New York State law, increasing the time young people may stay in residential programs up to 120 days in crisis services programs and up to 24 months in TIL programs. Following these state and city legislative changes, we also created residential services for youth up to age 24. We now have 4 programs with a total of 60 beds for homeless young adults ages 21 to 24. Crisis services programs provide emergency shelter and crisis intervention services. Youth have their basic needs met and work with staff to develop a service plan with short and long-term goals. In cases where family reunification is not possible, provider staff work with youth to identify appropriate transitional and long-term housing opportunities. TIL programs are a longer-term housing option that provides support as youth establish an independent life through education and career development, health services and mental health care, counseling, and basic life skills training. Our drop-in centers in each borough serve youth ages 14 to 24, and at our 8 DYCD drop-in centers, youth are provided basic needs such as food, clothing, supportive services, recreation, health and educational workshops, counseling, and referrals to other services, including shelter as needed. At least 1 center in every borough is open 24 hours a day, every day of the week. Street outreach focuses on locations in the city where young people tend to congregate, offering on-the-spot information and referrals. The goal is to develop a rapport with youth and connect them to services, including shelter. Counselors in RHY programs work with youth to develop individualized service plans to outline short and long-term goals. They can get a range of supported services, both directly and through referrals. For example, health and mental health services, counseling, education and career support, substance abuse prevention, violence intervention and prevention counseling, and housing assistance. When appropriate, staff members help young people in reuniting with the family or moving to longer-term programs. DYCD RHY programs, like other city programs, experienced increased demand for services as the number of new arrivals to the city increased. RHY services remain available to young people regardless of immigration status. In response to increasing numbers of young people who need language assistance, we expanded access to telephonic interpretation services. Our most popular languages include French, Spanish, Wolof, Fulani, and Pular. DYCD coordinates with our partner agencies and participate in the multi-agency youth asylum seeker coordination meetings. DYCD providers of runaway and homeless youth services, including all residential programs and drop-in centers, give information about services related to immigration, including immigration-related legal services. Providers share written information with youth upon intake to ensure that all those who may need the information will have it. We partner with Moya to incorporate information about legal and other immigration services into mandated trainings for RHY provider staff. Thank you once again for the opportunity to discuss how we're addressing the needs of runaway and homeless youth. We look forward to continuing to collaborate with the council, advocates, providers, and young people with lived experience to improve services for youth. We're pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to hear very quickly, maybe from all the agencies, we can go from one to the other, around how they identify and track the number of unaccompanied minors going through each of their systems.
Thank you, Chair. Moya does not identify and track unaccompanied immigrant youth through its programs.
So unaccompanied minors wouldn't technically be in ACS's care, but young people who do not have immigration status who are in foster care, while we don't track them in the way I think you mean track them, we are working with them on their legal status, and our Office of Immigrant Services tracks them in their case. And so we know how many young people in care we're working with to help with their legal status, and we know how many young people in care are destitute. But you could be in care as destitute and not have an immigration issue. It could be that you're born in New York City and both of your parents are deceased, so you'd be destitute.
Similarly, for young people who we are working with on their immigration status, they might not be an asylum seeker, but they could be in New York another way and not have immigration status. But it's very important to make sure we're not putting any young people or their families at risk by asking them and tracking their immigration status.
DYCD does not track migrant youth and RHY programs. We keep in close communication with our providers to understand the needs of the RHY population as it changes, and to ensure that those youth are connected to the specialized resources that they need.
So I guess maybe we'll start here really quickly, based on that question and in reflection of the testimony that we just heard from the young person, Mamadou. Can each of you tell me how your agencies failed in this scenario?
I just want to start by saying that individualized case information is confidential, and so we can't, in a public hearing, speak to any young person's individual experience. So I'm happy to answer questions more generally.
I'm asking, we heard a number of failures. How should ACS be preventing these failures that we heard? And we heard that this is not an isolated instance, that we were seeing a good number of these cases. So just in your quick reflection, what should ACS be doing to prevent these failures?
Sure. I just want to make entirely clear, I'm going to take a step back and not talk to this individual's individual circumstance. In general, most of the young people who interact with ACS, there is no issue around their age. We know they're young people, or we know they're not. It's only the circumstances described earlier, really only in the limited number of circumstances where there are questions about a young person's age, which is a new experience for ACS and not something we previously dealt with. In the past, it was extremely clear that if a case was referred to us by the state, it was about a young person. We have, since the summer, put in place a protocol for our staff to follow so that they can use the totality of the circumstances to determine whether or not the individual being referred to us is in fact a child. The destitute minor statute does require that the person be under 18, so to be able to seek legal authority, ACS can't just bring people into foster care, we have to have legal authority to do that. So we do need to be able to plead in court that this is someone under 18, or 18 and under 18, and we need to be sure that we're not adding adults to the foster care system. So we have now, I think the protocol is helping us have a better sense of how to address this issue better.
Does DYCD have a response to that?
DYCD works very hard to spread information about our drop-in centers and all of the resources that we have available to youth, and to get youth placed in the appropriate programs that they're eligible for as quickly as possible.
Do you think the example offered, are you saying there was a lack of DYCD information in any of those shelter facilities and we should be doing that?
I'm not sure about Mamadou's exact case. His name is a common name, and we've had quite a few young people by that name. But in instances where there is a bed available within DYCD system, we would make sure that that young person would be attached to that bed, whether that call is coming from an advocate or from a community partner, an individual, a school, it doesn't matter. We try to connect those individuals as expeditiously as possible.
How about Moya?
Given that Moya does not track the number of unaccompanied immigrant minors in New York City, I can't say how our office has failed. I can say that historically, the majority of unaccompanied minors are designated as such by the federal government at the border, historically, and then in OR custody, and then reunited with a sponsor or placed into a least restrictive setting until a sponsor is found. Typically, when reunited with a sponsor, those youth and their sponsor will seek services from the city. Youth who age out of OR custody when they turn 18 often seek services from the city. And youth who are under 18 and were not designated as unaccompanied minors also seek services from the city. And so I think taking a more specific look at these subpopulations that, as my colleague from ACS mentioned, this is a new phenomenon, and working as we have been across agency and with community partners to best address the needs is all of our responsibility.
All right, I think we're going to probably dive into many of the failures that this story elucidated, and also that were reflected in much of the testimony of many of the advocates before, but we'll move on to zoom out just a quick second. This question is for Moya, if we could start. In June, the Biden administration issued a presidential proclamation to temporarily suspend the entry of non-citizens across the southern border during periods of high encounter. Unaccompanied children, however, were exempted from that proclamation. Advocates therefore expected the numbers of unaccompanied children crossing the border to increase as parents were faced with an impossible choice to send their children to the U.S. alone in search of safety. How has Moya, if at all, tracked these developments and sought to account for a potential of unanticipated increases in unaccompanied youth who may be traveling to New York City?
Thank you for your question. Moya's policy team has a federal senior policy advisor who closely tracks legislative and administrative developments in the federal government across various agencies responsible for the identification and care of unaccompanied minors, as well as predicting future trends and increase in numbers in that population and others. We work closely with national partners also. Thought leaders in the field, many of whom work with and are part of iCare in order to best understand the emerging and evolving needs of the population. And we provide cross-agency updates on federal policy developments. We wouldn't do so in the event or in the circumstance of a prediction. However, we do have internal conversations and work with our agency partners to ensure that resources are allocated where they need to be allocated to the extent possible to serve a population. One example of that is the pivot of the Action NYC in Schools program to conduct immigration legal screenings in RHY shelters for those youth aged 18 to 20 so that they don't age out of special immigrant juvenile status.
I think I'm a little confused by your answer. I think you mentioned you wouldn't necessarily respond to projected increases, but you're responding to actualities on the ground. Is that what you just said?
No, we would track predictive increases, but we wouldn't necessarily provide a policy update to
or funding or programs or anything.
No, we would use that information to request or identify the need for additional resources.
So in this circumstance, given the track and the expectations, and we saw that materially actually happen where we had huge numbers of unaccompanied youth, was Moya's response to pivot the Action NYC? Were there other places where Moya sought to address this issue?
The pivot of Action NYC in Schools to provide immigration legal services in the RHY shelters and drop-in sites was a concrete action that we can point to using existing resources to serve the needs of the population. Can't speak to internal conversations related to resource allocation, can say that we engage with external partners, including and especially iCare and its membership, to understand the trends, the needs, and take them back internally for our internal discussions about resources.
So has Moya been engaging with the Office of Refugee Resettlement as well?
To my knowledge, Moya has not. Moya did receive a request from U.S. Health and Human Services to add a VOR card, which is a form of identification provided to unaccompanied minors, to the list of qualifying documents for IDNYC enrollment, and Moya did process that request, and it currently sits with IDNYC.
But Moya hasn't engaged in any advocacy or conversations with OR about the increases of unaccompanied minors in the city and potential needs?
I can get back to you with respect to specific meetings or conversations. I'm not aware of any initially. I do know that there are general engagement sessions with various offices and agencies in the federal government. However, I'm not currently aware of any specific conversations with the OR, but we will get back to you.
Great, thank you. In 2014, Moya had convened a task force on this issue of the rising number of unaccompanied minors in the U.S. and New York City. Obviously an issue very relevant today, in fact, much larger than 2014. Is Moya still coordinating this interagency task force?
That specific task force does continue. So there are a number of task forces within the city in which issues related to unaccompanied minors are discussed, best practices shared, resources shared, and strategies discussed. The Human Trafficking Youth Prevention Working Group is one. There are multiple working groups across agencies that deal with issues that touch the population. Citywide response to human trafficking convenings, FGMC advisory committees, the Migrant Public Safety Steering Committee, and the Domestic Violence and Child Welfare Working Group. And I believe that Child Welfare Working Group is where these issues are most directly discussed.
But the specific interagency task force on unaccompanied minors is still meeting? No.
I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't have that specific information.
Okay. Is there a reason why this doesn't have its own function and focus when the numbers are double what they were in 2014?
My understanding is that in 2014, the agency, Moya, together with its sister agencies, created that task force specifically to ensure that immigrant youth identified at New York Immigration Court, specifically because that was a venue in which they could be identified, would be connected with healthcare insurance and other resources. My understanding generally, and I cannot speak to specifics here, but is that the resources that are available to unaccompanied minors and all immigrant New Yorkers are broadly available, and that the specific identification of unaccompanied minors or immigrant youth in immigration court is not happening, in part because the resources are so widely available, or at least information about the resources is available.
I hear optimism that maybe we don't need it, but what we're seeing is clearly we do need it. And clearly there's been a real focus in growth in services to the credit of many of your agencies and many New Yorkers, right, addressing the issue. But it is clear the numbers have doubled. It is clear the funding has not. And we have a serious situation that we need to pay some focused attention to. In 2015, Moya also had announced an initiative, I think this is what you were referring to have a city staffer in federal immigration court to engage and screen at very first appearance in the juvenile docket. Is this initiative still in place?
Moya does not have a city staffer at New York Immigration Court. screening youth for benefits eligibility and providing information and resources. However, again, I do believe that since that time, the field generally of service providers, together with city agencies and partners, have increased the visibility and availability of resources and information.
Do you know of anyone that is actually in immigration court in the juvenile docket doing this?
The Office of Civil Justice oversees the iCare program as well as the Immigrant Opportunities Initiative program, which are the programs through which the majority of this work would be carried out, as well as the unaccompanied minors and families program. So I don't have specific information about their activities in immigration court. However, those programs do handle more complex immigration legal cases, which immigration matters related to immigrant youth would normally fall under.
Given the numbers alone, would you think it would be an urgent matter to check in with immigration court to see if the services are being offered at this point?
I absolutely do think that it's important to ensure that all immigrant New Yorkers, and especially unaccompanied immigrant youth, have access to information about available resources and services in their language and in a format that they can connect with.
In January of 2015, Moya had published an online document listing and describing city resources for immigrant children and youth, and several agencies, mayoral offices also contributed to the information in this document. Does the administration have a plan to update it?
No current plan. The Office of Immigrant Affairs has developed a resource that is intended for all immigrant New Yorkers and published it in multiple languages beyond the top 10 and distributed it through shelters and various other places where it could be encountered by immigrant youth. And I think it's important to note that although the resources are general and not specific to immigrant youth or unaccompanied immigrant minors, they are entry points and touch points where they may have a conversation with someone such as a Moya Immigration Legal Support Hotline operator who listens to them to understand what services they need and direct them in a closer way. And so the fact that they are not specifically geared toward unaccompanied immigrant minors, in my perspective, doesn't necessarily do them harm because they're guided to a place where they could have a conversation with someone, a case manager at a local CBO that's part of the Moya Immigration Navigation Network or the hotline that can help them through it.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I keep reflecting on the experience of Mamadou, who had no access to any information and no access to any information in language accessible ways. It's like mystifying to me that we have some generalized information on a website and we are still hearing young people not getting any access to any of it despite claims of this intensive case management.
Case management occurs in the shelter sites, and it's a bit different from the case management that I was referring to, which often takes place at community-based organizations and nonprofits that provide sort of social services navigation and connect youth to resources, including school enrollment and other things. I will say that Moya's engagement with the community goes beyond distributing flyers. We've held multiple calls with community-based organizations, community partners, advocates to hear from them and to provide resources to the extent possible. Those conversations will continue to happen.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the work you do with community-based organizations, and we've seen here today that, you know, they are doing incredible work with very little resources. I'm actually more concerned about how the interagency coordination is happening and training and making sure that we have seamless policies across and we don't have a situation like that was described earlier happening over and over again. So I guess, how Moya is able to expand its resources across city agencies to make sure we're doing much better is of primary concern. So at an Immigration and Hospitals April 2024 hearing, Moya had shared that they were pivoting, as you mentioned earlier, to Action NYC in schools to screen the 18 to 20-year-olds in RHY shelters, and we're planning to surge resources to the youth identified in the screening over the summer to connect individuals turning 21 with direct assistance and triage the remainder. At the time of the hearing in April, there were around 400 youth in shelters, and 80% were from African countries. What were the updated numbers, and I think you mentioned this in your testimony earlier, and the statistics from the screening process?
Thanks for the question, Chair. So the sprint took place, we called it a sprint because it was in a limited duration of time. It was also a pilot in some ways because Moya had not worked directly with DYCD RHY shelters in the past and in this way. Over the course of June through August of this summer, 170 youth were screened for immigration legal relief eligibility, including SIDGE. 84 were referred for legal representation. Sometimes that was they were referred to legal representation under other contracts, such as the IOI contracts after the initial screening. And there were 6 emergency age-out petitions filed in family court. These numbers are preliminary as we await the finalization and validation of fiscal 25 Q1 numbers, which would more directly capture these. But generally, case managers across the RHY system, both in drop-in sites and sites with beds, expressed that the provision of services to that specific population was welcomed and needed, and that while it is a learning experience for all of us with any pilot, they would be interested in additional trainings and resources for the population.
So for the 170 that you screened, how many individuals received direct assistance?
170 were screened, and 84 were referred for legal representation, with 6 emergency age-out petitions filed in family court for youth that were within months or weeks of their 21st birthday and at risk of aging out of SIDGE. The team continues to work through the list of youth who were screened or scheduled to be screened and serve that population, including those that were identified for legal assistance.
I'm sorry, so the remaining almost 100 young people, what happened to them?
Could you please repeat?
So 84 got legal representation and 6 you did age-out petitions. What happened to the remaining young people?
I'll have to check back at the numbers, but I believe that youth that did not receive legal representation, it was either because their case wasn't ready to proceed. For instance, they may not have had a trustworthy adult identified as a guardian, which would be needed to proceed in a SIDGE case. They may have been determined to be ineligible for immigration relief of some sort. They may have already had an attorney or have already filed the necessary petitions or applications. And so I don't have a specific breakdown of the reasons why more youth were not referred for legal representation. However, those are some of the common reasons.
Great. We'd like to know where they were triaged to, if they're if you were unable to assist them. In terms of, with the phasing out of Action NYC by the end of this year and the replacement programming not intended to have a physical presence in schools, are there any plans by the administration to engage with school-age students eligible for special immigrant juvenile status or other immigration statuses and connect them to legal service providers?
Thank you. Moya continues to engage with our partners at DOE, in particular the team that worked on and works to implement the Project Open Arms plan to ensure, at minimum, that information about immigration legal services available through the city and other sources is made available to youth. For the purposes of Action NYC in schools, and as you noted, its wind down, we can't talk much about the new procurement and the Moya Immigration Legal Support Centers, but I can say that it's intended to ensure that legal service providers are partnering with school locations in their neighborhood to ensure a closer connection and also a more widespread and distributed set of connections between local institutions such as schools and immigration legal service providers that are community-based. In this procurement, up to 25 awards will be made for immigration legal service contracts, and virtually all of those contractors could partner, and we would encourage them to partner with their local schools to provide Know Your Rights sessions and connections to immigration legal screenings and assistance.
So in terms of the DOE collaboration, what does that look like exactly?
With Action NYC in schools, there's a close multi-year partnership that has existed in which that team holds Know Your Rights sessions and legal clinics at schools with high immigrant youth populations throughout the city. With respect to Moya and its communication, there are standing meetings in which both Moya and New York City Public Schools, or DOE, are present, some of these interagency groups. However, I am not a participant in a standing call with DOE. Our engagement is typically on a case-by-case basis, and the Moya policy team also engages closely.
And so are there concerns with how the phasing out of Action NYC could disrupt the legal supports for minors, including those in immigration court currently?
Concerns have been expressed and addressed through formal responses by Moya and the city in the form of question and answer documents published as addenda to the RFPs, as well as public responses to the protest letters that were issued. And so some of the responses are there. With respect to ongoing matters, immigration legal service contractors are responsible for seeing the case through to completion. And Moya has engaged with current contractors to request a breakdown of the number of cases that they anticipate may be open beyond December 31st, which is when the current contracts will close. There will not likely be a large number of removal defense or SIDGE cases to be wound down under Action NYC, because Action NYC providers mostly deal with straightforward cases. The large number of removal defense and SIDGE cases are handled by IOI and the iCare programs.
It's interesting that you say that, because providers are definitely saying the opposite, that it is not just simply straightforward cases, that they have a good number of substantive cases, and in fact, something like SIDGE is a several-part process, and we're in a place where this program is winding down with no transitionary period to hire up and figure out anything else. So I'm not sure how you're reconciling these issues.
We'll continue to work with our existing contractors to identify means to ensure that they can continue to provide assistance and representation in existing cases rather than withdraw representation from those cases.
And how will you ensure that? If you're changing the model, how do you ensure that there's going to be continuity there? are you adding additional funding to make sure those cases are going to be held?
No additional funding will be added. If a current contractor is awarded a contract under the new procurement, we may work out some system to provide credit of some sort for cases that remain open. Those discussions are internal, and we do not have a policy to apply at this time. It also should be said that a number of the immigration legal service providers contracted with the city are contracted to provide services under multiple contracts and contract types. Internal conversations and conversations with those multi-contract holders could also provide another potential solution.
So in terms of what specific programming does Moya have for unaccompanied minors?
Moya does not have a specific program dedicated to that population.
Okay, that's what I thought. I think we'll be wrapping up, and don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the rest of the panel. Can you tell us how Moya performs outreach around this population to ensure that they're connected to appropriate resources?
Absolutely.
And what does coordination look like with DYCD and ACS in this regard?
Moya provides outreach in a few different ways. Some of them are through our community partners as contractors in the Asylum Seeker Navigation Centers program. Some of our outreach is conducted by Moya External Affairs staff. In fact, in the past year, I have some data here related to external affairs activities that I can provide. Just one moment, please. From January to present of this year, the Moya External Affairs team held 27 events dedicated specifically to the 18 to 24 population. And from May of this year to present, provided more than 1,000 youth aged 18 to 24 with IDNYC enrollment help. That group also provides one-pagers, the one-pagers I referenced earlier with general services information and other information at those events and tabling events. A form of outreach, and it's outreach because we distribute information about the Moya Immigration Legal Support Hotline, is that mechanism, so providing the hotline number, youth call. As mentioned previously, the hotline answered 57,000 calls in fiscal 24. We estimate that approximately 10% of those were immigrant youth under the age of 24, and that also is an important lifeline. Additionally, Moya partners with multiple agencies as well as a group called Algun Dia, which is not funded by the city but works closely with Moya and the city, including Owasso and other partners, to address issues related to child candy selling and provide resources and support to those families and also better understand the trends that are occurring there.
So how are you working with Algun Dia?
There is a working group that partners with them closely. So the city provides information about resources that they can distribute and also hears from them about the needs and trends of that particular population.
So a working group at Moya that's providing flyers or to Algun Dia?
I believe that the working group is populated mostly by members of the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, Ann Williams Isom's team. Moya participates as well, and it's an information exchange as well as an opportunity to provide training on how to distribute and talk about city resources and services.
Are they offering funding to this group?
To my knowledge, there is no funding involved.
In terms of the RHY providers have reported that there have been long wait lists for immigration assistance at their sites. How is Moya coordinating pro bono immigration attorneys and legal services to support the RHY providers?
The only coordination that Moya has engaged in with respect to immigration legal services at the RHY sites has been the sprint over the summer. Moya, aside from that, Moya is required by local law 4 to provide an annual presentation to RHY case managers and leadership with respect to the availability of immigration legal services citywide. And we do that on a regular basis, well, annually. I think more than 6,400 youth received information that was provided over the past approximately calendar year.
So the sprint is over? Are you not doing that work anymore? It was just that surge during the summer.
It was through August 31st.
Does Moya have plans to continue to do this work given the numbers haven't decreased?
As you know, Moya's immigration legal service programs are in a transitional period with the issuance of the new procurement. And so after that process is concluded, we will look to the providers and what they may be able to provide and the places where resources and support are needed and make those connections as best we can.
That's concerning. How is Moya coordinating with minors that aren't going through ORR at the border? Does Moya have a mechanism to ensure those minors are still receiving specialized services for their age group?
Other than ensuring that the Action NYC hotline and all of our community and legal service partners screen and refer immigrant youth to iCare for immigration legal services, as well as the broad distribution of information about those service entry points that I referenced earlier, we do not have mechanisms, but those are the two main ones.
So in terms of, I'd like to shift over to OWASO very quickly. Is it true that OWASO is now handling special immigrant juvenile status cases?
I can answer that. Hi, everyone. My name is Masha Kindler. I haven't had a chance to introduce myself. I'm the Executive Director of the Asylum Application Help Center, and historically we focus on asylum, TPS, and work authorization. However, we were interested in doing a pilot to see if we could do SIDGE cases pro se, and we have concluded that pilot. We consider it to have been successful. We focus on doing SIDGE for 20-year-olds that can't be referred to providers and are at risk of aging out of the support.
I'm sorry, did you say that it was successful? Can you tell us more about the numbers and what made it successful?
So we wanted to make sure that this is done right. So we've now filed 39 SIDGE cases, and of those, all but 2 were successful in getting the family court orders that we're able to send over to USCIS. And of those cases, 2 have received SIDGE status, and the rest we're still waiting on. But we were concerned about, we want to see if we were able to get the family court orders needed to send it to USCIS, and we found that in 95% of our cases so far, we were able to.
So it sounds like in these cases, they were 20-year-olds, which is better than what we are hearing. But with only 2 granted, how are you planning to remain with those cases to make sure that they are indeed successful?
It's a good question. So for those 2 that are granted, when I say successful, I mean that they got SIDGE status, deferred action, and we're able to bring them back and apply them for work authorization. But it's true that ultimately what's best for those clients is to eventually get connected to full representation. But I think just as we do with asylum, our role in the ecosystem is try to prevent people from aging out and give as many people supports as we can, knowing that we're adding to the kind of legal ecosystem, not substituting it. We ultimately are a pro se model. And we wanted to be able to do this to be as helpful as possible to the scenario that we're seeing.
I mean, as you heard in the testimony earlier, pro se model is not an appropriate model for SIDGE cases. Why do you believe that it's an appropriate model?
I think it depends. I think pro se model for 20-year-olds is appropriate because what we're looking at is these folks might have not been served at all if we weren't able to do these emergency SIDGes, because for a lot of the really amazing legal service providers that are doing this work and to whom we refer cases to as well, when we see them under 20, they have limitations about the folks being unaccompanied minors and being at least 18 months from 21 in many cases, being ordered removed. So there's some understandable gaps in the system that we hope to be helpful with.
What does that mean, hope to be helpful? So we have a return, we need legal representation. What does that mean? What is OWASO going to do for those cases?
I would say hope to be helpful in scenario A, and as a scenario where we don't provide the support, those individuals probably would not get any legal support at all and would just age out of being eligible for SIDGE and miss that opportunity. What we're able to do, while it's not full legal representation, is preserve them to make sure that they're able to file and be eligible for SIDGE in time before they hit 21. We're helping kids that are often, I mean, I shouldn't say kids loosely, but we're helping young adults that are weeks away from turning 21. And so we want to be able to preserve that, submit their documents to UCIS, most likely once we get the family court documents, get them the SIDGE status, and then they have time now to be able to get additional supports to get that green card down the line. As we heard, there's long lines for that process.
So in terms of these, in terms of this group of cases, your pilot cases, were all of them screened to make sure that they were a year before their 21st birthday?
Yes, exactly.
Are you screening and putting anyone through the system that is ready to turn 21, like a couple months before their 21st birthday?
At the moment, in the pilot phase, we're focusing on folks that are like 4 weeks out of turning 21.
Why would you do that?
When we were doing the pilot program, we had to prioritize the cases that were going to age out for us to figure out how to do it, to make sure we can do it, to make sure that we figure out all the kinks in the pro se model. And so it made most sense to focus on those that are about to age out, and also those individuals are not cases we could refer to legal service providers.
So you know those are cases you're not going to be able to get legal service provision for, but you open them up and push them through anyway, knowing potentially you may not even get a response for the petition within that time. It just seems utterly irresponsible to do that.
I want to know a little bit more about what you mean, because from our perspective, these are individuals that essentially in a couple weeks will never be eligible for SIDGE, but due to us walking them through the process and helping them fill out the pro se motions, they are able to, in 95% of our cases so far in the pilot phase, able to get the family court documents they need to submit with UCIS, and then we're able to apply them for work authorization, and we would be able to put in a motion to stop removal proceedings as well if needed. So it seems, I think that the complications around pro se model for SIDGE are real and interesting and things we need to continue discussing, and I respect the positions of folks about where the line of pro se for younger adults is, but at the end of the day, these are people that would be forever left out of the option to be getting SIDGE, deferred action, and potentially a green card unless we stepped in these, cases so far.
There's a lot to disagree with you. It seems like OWASO has a knack for like just starting stuff and walking away. And it seems to open up something when you know you won't be able to help They will not be able to access legal services and put them in direct jeopardy for not being able to actually get any relief at all.
In partner and we felt like the way that we're going about it will not result in any negative impact on the individual and would result in either
You
positive
did 39 applications. You only have 2 approved. How are you claiming, unless the standard is here is filling out paperwork, if that's our amazing. But that is not the outcome of success, correct?
Of course not.
So I think while you're obviously making a good effort, and this is not to say that you have different interests, that is not a measure of success here. And to claim to use a model that we know does not work for this population, to use a metric of how many petitions you were able to file is not okay. It's a little bit of a shell game. I think we need to be honest here. This is city resources that we have to invest appropriately to protect people and to support them. Doesn't make any sense to me. So over to my chair.
Will be minutes, but April 2023 revealed that DYCD runaway and homeless youth to 7-year-olds on behalf of ACS and ICE. Since 2022, have ACS or DYCD shared information about any youth or
does not and
agencies were trying to figure out refugee settlement, ORR, which serves unaccompanied youth. Has the information been available to successfully refer youth to ORR?
And I think she's asking if we have successfully referred anyone to ORR.
the question is, have we successfully referred individuals to ORR? We do not refer youth directly to ORR. Typically, we would, if a youth is in our care and they have been in ORR's custody, we would provide the youth that information for them to make that connection themselves.
So you haven't, so no?
No.
Okay. The MRR shows that drop-in centers, crisis service providers, and TILs for both youth and homeless young adults have increased and providers are nearly or have reached capacity. Furthermore, according to DYC and Local 79's report, 1,127 youth were unable to secure a bed between January and June of this year, a sharp increase from the prior 6 months. As the number of unaccompanied migrant youth continues to increase, what is the measures does DYCD plan to implement to ensure that we are not turning children away due to lack of beds?
At DYCD, we try to make the best use of all of the resources that we have available to us. If a youth is seeking a bed in a DYCD program is not available, we would try to make sure that that young person is connected to whatever. If there when they
push
it would
special